You're from Florida.
Yes,
What time is there?
9 p.m.
9 p.m. It's not bad.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. So Florida is a so big country. So where do your location in Florida?
We're in North Florida in Tallahassee, the state capital.
Tallahassee?
Yeah.
Is the capital city of Florida State.
Yes.
Okay, Tallahassee is not familiar to me. Tallahassee.
No, it's not familiar to most people.
Okay, I see. Okay. Okay, hi students. Every Wednesday morning, uh, we we hold a seminar and offer very good this seminar presentation from all over the world. Especially, I usually invite the very good faculty and professors from United States and Europe and in Korea as well. So this is very good opportunity for us, even me, to learn from very good learn from professors from other countries and other universities. So seminar gives us to expand our knowledge and information uh, about our domain, hospitality and tourism context. So today I invited Professor Sean McGinley, um, McGinley. Okay. Uh, he works for Florida State University. And Dr. Sean McGinley research focus is on career management of individual in hospitality labor market and labor market itself. Wow, it's interesting. He applies his work primarily to hospitality industry and also compared how the hospitality labor market differs from that of general economy. He he is best known for his work on turnover and career change in the hospitality industry, but also he studied what attract people to and prevent people from joining the industry. He has been published the top journals in hospitality and tourism, including but not limited to tourism management, International Journal of Hospitality Management, and Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Research. Those are all top tier journals. Okay, please welcome Professor Sean McGinley. The stage is yours from now on. Please sharing your file for our students. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you for having me here. Very excited and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. I was on your campus in May. It was beautiful and got to meet a few people there. So it's nice to kind of come back virtually. We actually have two Florida State students, undergrads, who just started classes at Kyunghee. So they're very excited to be there, and we're happy to continue this partnership. I think last year, another professor from my department, Dr. Tark Dogru, also joined you in this capacity. So thank you for having me here. I'm really appreciative, and I hope that you all get at least one or two things for the next couple of hours together. At any time you want, please stop me to ask questions. If something's unclear, if you want clarification or more information, I'm not that interesting to talk for 2 straight hours. I think we'll all be a little bored by the end of it. So uh, interruptions and questions are welcome. So um, we'll get started with what I've prepared and get going from there. So thank you again.
Good.
So
Very good.
my presentation is kind of twofold. My research and my research stream, how I got to that point and then ultimately what you do once you've become an expert in your field. So it's titled Hospitality and Career Management in a Changing World because that's what I study, and those have been my own personal experiences. So I'm Dr. Sean McGinley at the Dedman College of Hospitality at Florida State. The Director of International Studies here, and an associate professor. So we'll get started. So how did we get here? My research is very personal to me. So understanding why I study what I do really kind of requires you to know who I am and who the people are that I study. Because at the end of the day, organizations don't think, feel, and act, people do. And I study people. And so without understanding my background or the background of the people that I'm studying, I think a lot of the theories and implications and ultimately what we can do with our research to add value to the world gets lost. So for me, the most interesting element in pretty much anything and everything is the human element. So my first hospitality experience was at Kentucky Fried Chicken, the original KFC. I loved that job, which surprises a lot of people. Um, but it also showed me the power of hospitality to make people's lives better. Because when you go into a place like KFC, the service standards are usually quite low. So if you make eye contact and smile and ask people how they're doing, they usually are a little taken aback and aren't used to that type of treatment. So it's very easy to give people more when their expectations are very low. So I learned the secret to happiness is low expectations. And it was really fun to share happiness with people there. And so that is where I got my joy. That's where I got introduced to the industry. And this particular KFC is the actual store that I worked in for my first job. So this one means a lot to me. I went to Penn State to study after 2 years of working at KFC. I was having so much fun, but I wasn't making any money working fast food. So I wanted to continue doing what I was doing, but I wanted to make more money at it. So that required a college degree. So I got my BS in Hotel Restaurant Institutional Management. I was in the Schreier's Honors College. And hospitality literally opened up the world to me. The first country that I went to was with school for an internship. So the first time I left the US, I went to Japan for 3 months. And then I got to go to England for 3 months to work, and Jamaica and Italy for study trips, and got practical experience in the industry while I was there beyond just fried chicken. So I did internships in culinary arts on campus, in housekeeping in Atlantic City, a club internship on a US Navy base in Japan, and then a sales internship in London, England. So I got to see a lot of different places and then also a lot of different parts of the industry from a functional background. So I got to expose to a lot of different facets, guest service, non-guest facing parts of the business. When I graduated, I went to New York. I was an assistant front office manager, then guest services manager, then housekeeping, then exhibit hall. My last day of work at the Waldorf, we were setting up the stages for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame event. And so I was the guy in charge of the carpenters and the electricians setting that all up. That was my last day, which was great because I didn't have to do any of the work taking all of that down. And as you'd imagine, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has very big, intricate stages. They need a lot of electrical power. So I met a lot of really great friends there. I was a groomsman in two of their weddings, and people that I still travel to see on a regular basis, and really became a very meaningful place for me. 2 years after that, I moved to Auckland, New Zealand. I was a duty manager at the Crown Plaza, and I also worked with the Department of Natural Resources for an environmental restoration effort on Motahi Island, where we were bringing back the endemic forest to get rid of all of the foreign species that people have brought to New Zealand over the years. So I got to volunteer and show how a really special place can be preserved and enhanced for the next generation. Unfortunately, my work visa ran out, so I had to come back home. And I was at the Fairmont Pittsburgh, and I was on the front office manager. I was on the pre-opening management team. And I've told you all of this, not because it's all that impressive, but because it meant a lot to me to travel the world and to have these experiences and to get my education. And I was very thoroughly a hotel manager at this point. I was a hotelier. That was my professional identity. That's who I was. I had been working in the hospitality industry for 10 years. I got my education in it. I'd seen the world. This was it. And I really got to a point where I didn't want my boss's job, and I didn't want the job after my boss's job. And I started to feel lost. And I noticed a lot of my friends were also leaving the industry. People who I thought were really good people who had bright, interesting careers ahead of them were leaving the industry, just like I was considering. So this became the core of my function, my motivation, and really the question that inspires all of my research. Was I the one feeling this way to this industry that inspired me, that allowed me to give joy and happiness to people, that gave joy and happiness to me, where I got to see Japan, New Zealand, England, Jamaica, Italy, all for work, but wasn't really inspiring me anymore, was kind of leaving me exhausted, was leaving me burnt out. And if I was feeling this way and I noticed my friends were leaving the industry, could this be everyone feeling this way, or was it just me? With other people leaving for different reasons? And how could I figure out the answer to that? Because just asking my friends would only answer it for my friends. And that didn't feel like it was a sufficient answer. And so the answer to me was, well, I need to go back to school. One, because I wanted to get out of the business. And two, I really wanted an answer to this question because this was very personal to me and it was very interesting to me. Um, so ultimately, that's what I did. I went back
So
to
when
Penn.
was your time, the years? How
I
old
was
was there
6 years between school.
between school?
Yeah,
So how old at that time are you?
I was 28.
28. So you graduate from your undergraduate school and become the office work and 6 years experience in the field
Yes,
and returning to school.
yes,
There was the time 28.
yes.
Hmm. I see.
So yeah, I have a lot of respect for people who leave their job to go back to school because I gave up a lot of money and salary to go back and be a student. Um, I don't know if anybody um, on the Zoom meeting also had to do something like that, but that was very scary. Um, and that, I guess, is also an indication of how important that question was for me. Was I really wanted to know the answer, and I was willing to give up all those dollars to go back and be a student and study to get an answer to it.
But anyway, the decision you made, that was a right for your life.
Absolutely. Best decision I ever made.
Okay.
Well, second best. My first best decision was to study hospitality. My
Okay.
second best was to study it again.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I went back to where I knew, and I didn't think I was going to get into grad school. So what I did is I took classes at a local community college for the entrance exams, and I applied to University of Pittsburgh where I was working, Penn State, my alma mater, and the University of Washington, because I met a professor there. And I only applied to those three schools because it was $200 to apply. So that was $600. And I was convinced I wasn't going to get in, but I applied to those schools because I thought when they told me no, I could call them and ask them why they told me no. And I could apply next year and be a more attractive candidate. And I ended up getting into Penn State. So I left work a year early to go back. Um, I got my master's there, and that's when I first took the steps to answer those questions with my master's thesis. So I eventually got that published in IJHM, which was great.
Wow.
And then my PhD was a continuation on that work that also eventually got published in IJHM. So that was also great. But I didn't publish for my PhD for 3 years until I graduated. So everybody graduates with their PhD and they have their dissertation and they think, oh, I'm going to get papers out of this right away. I hated my dissertation so much by the time it was over, I couldn't even look at it for 2 years. And then I was able to go back and figure out what I could do to publish from it. So the dissertation is its own special place.
So Sean, let me ask you.
Yeah.
You tremendously work well. You published your master degree dissertation thesis to the top tier journal IJHM, and also you published your dissertation to IJHM again. So how can you say writing dissertation and writing thesis
Yes.
and publishing your thesis and the dissertation into journal papers? How big is different? How to feel? It's actually a student here, they don't know exactly the writing paper for thesis and dissertation and then changing those work into journal papers. They probably may not understand what the difficulty it is.
Well, the master's thesis compared to the dissertation, the master's thesis was easy because it was a lot shorter. It was only one study. So I was able to cut out big chunks of the master's thesis because both the thesis and the dissertation, you include a lot of work to show to your professors that you're a master of the subject area. You understand the theory inside and out. You know all the seminal papers, and those sections are about twice, maybe 3 times as long as they can be for a journal article for the length requirements. So I think my dissertation was like 127 pages and was multiple studies. So you had to cut down a lot from there. And that was challenging because you wrote it all and you wrote it for a reason and you feel good about it. So you want to keep it all in there, but you really can't. And then you have to do the same thing for your methodological section because you can't have, you need to demonstrate in your thesis or dissertation that you understand the method, that you're not just using it and getting a result, but you actually know it forwards and backwards. And so being able to identify what should stay in, what needs to come out, how do I need to say this is a challenge when you haven't really published a lot. If I had to do it now, I think it would be a lot easier. But doing it then, it was difficult. But I think why the master's thesis was easier, not only was it shorter, so there was less to cut out, but I stayed in school. So all my professors were there to help me and guide me and tell me, cut this section out. You don't need this paragraph. This was just for us. This isn't going to be needed in a journal article. And all of my committee members from my master's thesis were on that paper. But the dissertation, I was already out of school. Some of the work was no longer relevant. So I had to throw away some of the studies. And I actually had to conduct a new experiment to pair with data from my dissertation to get it in journal shape. And so that became a solo author paper because it just became a different paper. So I just used pieces of the dissertation rather than publishing it directly. So the master's thesis was a lot more straightforward. I don't know if that answers that question.
Okay, it's a somewhat, but my question was like paper publication in journal, top tier journal, just like IJHM. It's very tough game to survive. But
Yes.
dissertation is a somewhat flexible and forgivable from the committee members. So among your committee members are about 4 or 5 members, recognize who you are and your good friendship with them. So they said, "Oh, good job." But journal publication is totally different business. So there is peer reviewed, and we don't know who they are, and they just try to kill my papers.
Yeah.
Sort of things. That was my questions.
Yeah. The committee members, they want you to write the best paper that you can, but they want you to write the paper and they want it to be completed. So when they give you feedback, they also tell you what to do to address the feedback and how to fix it.
Mm.
And if you have any questions, you can go to them and say, well, what do you mean by this?
Mm.
How should this, how should this be changed? Do you like what I did here? Do you not like it? And then you have that back and forth with them.
Mm.
And so ultimately, the paper is always moving forward and always satisfies you and your committee members.
Mm.
But with reviewers, you don't know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they're there standing almost like guardians to the journal, only letting certain papers pass.
Mm.
So if you misunderstand what a reviewer is saying, or they don't like the way you responded to their comment, they can just reject it and never have to deal with you again.
Mm.
And as a reviewer, there's a temptation to do that because you don't know who the author is. And if you got confusing or insufficient revisions back, you're like, oh, now that I review papers, I can understand how important it is to take those reviews seriously and with care. And if you disagree with a reviewer, you really need to justify that disagreement. And you probably only can do that with one or two comments. And you need to say yes to everything else, whether you really believe in it or not. Whereas with the committee members, it's more of a negotiation.
Mm. Yes.
Yeah, so that's a key difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if your committee members don't want you to succeed, you probably need new committee members.
Yes, so you can change it to committee members.
Yeah, you
But
can't
journal
change your
under review
reviewers.
paper, so you cannot change it under reviewers and okay.
Yeah. So there are some definite differences there.
Mm. Okay, cool.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions about that process? I guess not. Okay. So what I did after Penn State, and I completed my dissertation, I defended on May 1st. I'll never forget that. Is trying now to go from completing classes and writing your dissertation to actually establishing a research agenda. So I've been at Florida State. I'm beginning my 9th year now. So I've done careers research. So I study the employment arc. So my main questions are what attracts people to industries and organizations, what drives them out of industries and organizations, and what are specific hospitality and tourism labor market dynamics. So essentially, how do we get people? Why do they leave? And what's going on in hospitality that is similar or dissimilar to the rest of the economy? And that last bullet point is something I've only gotten into recently. So I have the least to say about that because I've only been doing that for like the last 2 years. So my original question, and this is straight out of my master's thesis, so you can tell that this was written about 12 years ago. I don't think you could get a graphic this poor published today, which is probably for the best. But this was okay back in 2012, I think. So why do entry-level hotel managers leave, or why do entry-level managers leave the hotel industry? That was me. That was my friends. Those were people that I respected. So what was going on? What could explain this phenomenon? And I did grounded theory. So I did qualitative data with this because I wanted to know why, and I wanted to map out that social process that people went through and build theory. And I think that's really important when you are starting a career to learn qualitative methods they take longer, they're messier, and it's hard to do. It's hard to get the data. It takes a lot to transcribe the data. It's a lot of time, but ultimately you get very rich data and you can build theory. So if your theory says something unique, you can publish off of that uniqueness for many years. And so not only what I studied, but how I studied it, you'll see is kind of progressed throughout the years. So this was my master's thesis, my first publication. Um, and essentially we're looking at this model as the stages people go through to ultimately leave the industry when they're early on in the careers like I was. So one of the things to really focus on are this box here, dissatisfaction with career progression and perception of working hours to pay. Because these two things are very important. And you'll see why as I progress my research agenda, because they begin to drive my research questions in the future. They're ultimately what made me the most interested. So I followed up with that, and this is data from my dissertation. So you can see in just a couple of years how much the higher standard is for graphics getting into journals. I studied here career variety and somebody's career satisfaction. So moderating that high versus low career variety versus how satisfied you are with your career, how likely you were to want to change careers or leave our industry. And so people with high career variety is pretty flat. They just are. And when you have low career variety, which is defined by the amount of unique and novel experiences you've had over a period of time, if you're low career variety and low satisfaction, you're more likely to leave than people with high career variety. But if your career satisfaction is high, there's almost no chance of you leaving the industry at all. And we see that here with the protein career orientation. So how you perceive your career as being something that is fluid, something that you're in self-control over rather than the organization, that you have subjective career success rather than objective career success being important to you, and all of these different things, you see the same pattern emerge. So most people think people who've had a lot of jobs are more likely to leave. We don't want to hire them. And that's true only when they're not satisfied with their careers. So we can kind of see this career satisfaction being a moderator. And so I took that original master's thesis and followed it up with my dissertation, kind of building on that initial qualitative work with survey research, just creating my survey, asking people those questions, they're responding, and that creates the next paper, the next big statement. So that's sort of like the follow-up to that question.
I got a question.
Yeah.
The previous slide.
This one?
No, next. The result. High career variety, and there is no such a motivating effect. But however, career satisfaction, when the career is low satisfied, their career change intention is high. And the career satisfied very high, they don't want to change. I totally agree with this result. But however, in terms of salary, even though low career satisfaction, what if receiving decent salary? Then that would be not much changing intention. So didn't you consider that kind of a financial status for this research model?
I believe that would be the case if you looked at general workers, but we were restricting our data to those entry-level managers. So the variance in salary was very low, so we didn't see any responses because we were looking at the early career people. So you had to be in a management position, but you weren't managing other managers. So basically like a supervisor, or you had to be 30 years or younger. So we wanted to get that sort of like that entry level manager type person. And so we didn't see a lot of variety in or variance, I should say, in income.
So just to focus on the career satisfaction and the switching intention.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because that was my, in grad school, that was really the population that I was most interested in because that's the population I came from. So those were my people. That's who I identified with. That's what I wanted to study. And as I've gotten out of grad school and became a professor, I started opening up to more different types of workers and line level versus managers and other things. Yeah. And I jumped ahead, way ahead. Sorry about that, guys. This was one of the first studies that I was looking at outside of grad school. And I was looking at, again, career progression here on the left and career change intentions again, and looking at work-life conflict. So do you have a lot of career opportunities ahead of you? Do you see that in the future for you or do you not? And what's your level of work-life conflict that you're experiencing right now? And so that high level of work-life conflict, if you have high career progression opportunities, it moderates your likelihood to leave. It lowers it, which makes a lot of sense. I might have a lot of work-life conflict at the moment in my current job, but I think I'm going to be able to progress my job, and then my new job might not have those same levels of conflict, which makes a lot of sense to me. And then I also looked at job insecurity. So how do I feel about my job, both, and insecurity can be qualitative or quantitative. So quantitative job insecurity is I feel like I'm going to lose my job. Qualitative job insecurity is I feel like the conditions of my job are going to get worse. And so you can look at it a couple of different ways, but regardless of what way you look at it, it does have an impact on your likelihood to change careers. And here we looked at another personality profile, grit, right? So what kind of passion and perseverance do you have for your vocation, your professional pursuits? And people who are low in grit are always more likely to change jobs. And people who are high in grit are always more likely, but when job insecurity is high, there becomes a significant difference between gritty people and non-gritty people. And so we're starting to identify different moderators in that career change question and starting to identify different independent variables when we're looking at that career change question as well. And so here we're
Professor,
doing, yeah.
McGinley, I don't understand the meaning of grit. Can you explain grit? Okay.
Yes. So gritty people, it's a two-factor variable or two-facet variable, I'm sorry, where one facet is interest. So like how interested, how passionate are you about whatever it is that you're doing? And the other one is perseverance. So how likely are you to overcome obstacles and challenges to continue doing what you're doing? So it's that, I believe the quote from Angela Duckworth is, it's not falling in love, it's staying in love with what you do. So a lot of times we might find something that is really interesting and captures our imagination, but after 6 months or a year, we're not really that interested anymore. With grit, we have found something that we really like, that we're really passionate about, and that passion sustains itself over a long time period. And so people who are gritty tend to get really passionate about maybe one, two, or three things in their life. And those are like the only things that they care about. So that non-gritty people seem to take more interests in more subjects, but lose interest a lot more quickly.
Okay. Okay. It's a born to be.
Actually,
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry for interrupting.
No, no.
But
No,
Professor, actually I'm getting ahead of myself, but I read one of your articles. I think
I'm
it's
so
called
sorry.
like, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I read one of your articles. I think it was about constraints to attracting new hotel workers. And I think in that article you mentioned low work-life conflict and high work-life conflict. And like I do think that the improvement of perceptions of pay and career opportunities and like career progression are quite helpful in addressing turnover and labor shortages. But aside from that, what other changes could you suggest to mitigate this issue?
For mitigating career change and turnover?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh boy. If I had the answer to that question, I wouldn't be a professor anymore. I'd be doing something else. If we could solve turnover, boy, would we really have done something. What I have really, what I believe companies and professors are not paying enough attention to are those future-oriented factors. And that's actually a really great question because my next slide kind of talks about that. So what do all my studies have in common is it's those future-oriented effects. That it's perceptions about will I get promoted or not? Will I have career progression? Or will my career get worse? Job insecurity or lose my job? Will I have work-life conflict in the future? I did a study, not a part of this presentation, of looking at people's perceptions of emotional labor and them thinking, is this an industry-wide problem or is this a my job problem? And so when you look at all of that, what my conclusion has been is that professors and managers and everybody involved in retaining people are too concerned about how people are feeling right now and not concerned enough about what their staff, what their managers think is going to happen in the future. And so I kind of call that those future-oriented effects. Work-life conflict, emotional labor, job stress, burnout, all of these things. I'm not saying that they don't matter, but I'm saying that they only color in part of the story. And we have to spend more time looking at those future effects.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like those things are more of a short-term solution,
Mhm.
and like we need to come up with more of long-term solutions to solve that.
Yeah. And I think it
Okay.
makes sense if you are stressed writing a dissertation, which, like, hi, welcome to the club,
Yeah.
right? Everybody's stressed writing a dissertation, but we also know the dissertation ends, and we are writing the dissertation in hopes of a brighter future. What will happen once we have that PhD in our professor? And becoming a professor is going to be better than being a grad student. And to let you in on a secret, it is better to be a professor than it is to be a graduate student. It's better to write papers for journals than it is to write dissertations and theses, right? Um, and so it makes the stress of the dissertation a lot easier to deal with because you have that hope of a better future. And not just a hope, but a belief in it. Because if you didn't believe in it, you wouldn't be writing the dissertation. And I think we need to also like apply that same logic to the people who are working with us. If you have a lot of stress right now, are more staff coming to make your job better? so that you'll have less job insecurity because your job's about to get better because we're hiring more staff? Is your life about to get better because we see a way to promote you or get you into a better position that you want to be in? And it makes it easier to deal with the stress and the bad stuff now. The trick is you can't just tell people these things. You've got to show it. You've got to make sure that they believe it. And so that's what I think we're not spending enough time as managers or professors on.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for asking a question. I really appreciate it. But also speaking of that paper, you probably recognize this figure from it. This is where I started to branch off from. I'm sorry, this is not from that paper. It's a slide coming up. I started with qualitative data, then I did survey data, then I did experimental data. And when I was in grad school, we could learn process modeling or SEM. We could not learn both. We didn't have time to take classes on both. So I learned process modeling. So I don't know how to do SEM. But I found a professor who does know how to do SEM, who does not know how to do process modeling. So depending on the study, one of us does the theory and the other does the data analysis. It's a great partnership. And so now that I had a bunch of studies to cite, I was able to do the big SEM study that kind of tested a large piece of the theory all at once. And so this has like 7 hypotheses, which I had never worked with a study that had 7 hypotheses before, because I've always done a series of experiments or survey data. And so this was a big study for me, putting multiple pieces together from multiple studies, looking at it, putting it together in one model and testing it. So we're looking at that perseverance and passion, those 2 parts of grit, that Protean career orientation, job insecurity, all of those interaction and moderating effects on job attitudes that ultimately determine, do you feel embedded in the organization or do you want to leave? And so that's, where I came to that conclusion, and kind of how I built not just theoretical questions building on each other, but then also supporting it with various methods. So I know how to analyze survey data. I know how to analyze experimental data. I know how to do qualitative data analysis. I didn't know how to do SEM. So finding those people, being able to ask those questions that SEM can answer, I was able to do that because I knew the theory so well, because I had worked on it and it had been built on each other. So that led me to.
Could you go back to the previous slide? I have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure. No, nobody's interrupting. This is great.
I just didn't understand what the minus and the plus means next to the hypothesis. Could you please explain?
Yes, absolutely. The minuses are a negative association. So as Protean career orientation goes up, job attitudes go down. And as perseverance and passion go up, job attitudes also go up. So one of them is looking at those positive associations versus negative associations.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, yes. So my next question became, if future-oriented effects can influence career change, what else can they impact, right? And so this is where I got to that study about industry attraction. So if future-oriented effects drive people out of the industry, could they also play a role in helping people join or preventing people from coming in? So this survey studied people specifically who had never worked in hospitality before, because if people are changing their careers out of the industry, we're losing a net number of people. We need to get new people. Where if they're just turning over and going from Hyatt to Hilton, we don't need any new people. And so wanted to see what are the perceptions of the industry for people without experience in our field, and how do those future perceptions play a role in that decision-making process. So all of our independent variables were perceptions of, right? Perceived social isolation, perceived work-life conflict, career progression opportunities, and then remuneration. So what is your compensation package going to look like? How do all of those perceptions of our industry, what they could anticipate while working for us, lead to attitudes towards working in hotels, and ultimately whether or not they would be likely to apply for a job or recommend a job they found. And so we found that, again, that future-oriented factors played a large role. And what we found played the largest role were these personal constraints. So we might think that like career progression and pay would be the most, explain the most variance. They were significant, but work-life conflict and perceived social isolationism played the largest role in explaining the variance towards attitude towards hotel jobs. And we found that to be very interesting because a lot of people think of hospitality as a very low-paying industry. So we thought, oh, people are going to think the pay is low, so they're not going to apply for jobs. And they did think that, but they thought that the working conditions would actually be more of a constraint to applying for the job. And so we found that to be a very interesting takeaway. And again, a very important group of people, because if people aren't comfortable applying to jobs in our industry, where do we replace the people who leave our industry with, right? We need more people, not less. Especially as the hospitality industry continues to grow. We're now the largest private sector industry in the world in terms of employment. And depending on who you believe and how they count economic activity, we're the first, second, or third largest in revenue generation. And that just really comes down to how revenue is counted across the world from different agencies. So I felt like this was also a very important question. How do we get people in? And it really comes down to that working conditions and what people think about work in the industry.
Professor Sean.
Yes.
In terms of this keyword, industry attraction.
Yes.
Okay. As we know, all we are experiencing COVID-19 before and after. So through the COVID-19 pandemic situation, the industry, hospitality industry, is totally changing to the very negative. So
yes.
Probably this paper before the COVID-19. So this motivation is and then constraint would be changing worse than the COVID-19. So what do you think about that? Is it recovering now or still remain the negative images? And another one is you measure the competitivity. I know that competitivity is fit your job and yourself. But what do you think of value? Some people prefer to job because of a value. I like hospitality job. I like people interacting, interface sort of things. It's rather than competitively. It's kind of a trust, kind of a a philosophy sort of things. Have you considering those kind of the aspect?
I think those are really interesting questions and definitely ones that could be studied in the future. Can I tell you a secret though? Don't tell your students this one, okay? Just between you and me. The COVID question, we did this exact same survey. So this study was published in 2017. We did the exact same survey questions at the end of 2021 to try to go back to the journal and say, this is how things are different pre and post COVID. And no relations were significant at all. So this entire model broke down 100%. And so we weren't able to send it back to the journal because we had nothing to say the only thing that we could say is this model no longer works. Don't ever cite it again, which obviously isn't something that we would want to do. But also that was 2021 and COVID was still playing a major part in people's lives. So I think what would be really interesting is for us to do the survey maybe next year and say, okay, in 2017, we got these results. In 2021, nothing was significant at all. In 2025, does it work again? Like, was that the COVID effect? Are we over it now? And I don't know the answer to that question because I don't have that data. But it has been something I've been thinking about. Yeah, the other question about rather than compatibility of looking at I like this type of work. I think there's really interesting stuff being done on calling. It's like, do I feel called to work with people? Is this my calling in life to do this type of work, this type of vocational work? And I haven't started in that now. There's a professor that I really respect who does that work. And so I think that's something that in the future could pair up with my stream of research really well. But with calling, I think it is satisfying a need. Or if there's something that's not satisfied with you, if I do this kind of work, it would be. So I'd have to figure out how I could apply that to like those future perceptions, which I think I'd need another person's perspective on. I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question just yet. But yeah, that's sort of what I've been doing to follow up with this particular study. So I'm not quite there yet. We will also talk about a lot more ways that I have failed later on in this study or in this presentation, which is, I think, great.
Okay.
So that's my looking at industry attraction. I've also looked at company level attraction, right? So this is another experimental data, and you're probably seeing a trend when I am doing early studies. I'm doing the survey data, looking at process models, I'm looking for correlations. Then I start doing experiments. Then I do a big SEM study, and then I kind of move on to a next thing, so that I have a stream of papers around it. So I started looking at company level attraction, right? As if you have a particular psychological need, right? Your own need for status or NFS, how does that impact which organizations you want to work for, whether the organization is signaling that status or not signaling that status? And so people with high levels of need for status, you know, they are more likely to be attracted to industry work. I don't know the answer to that question. Why high need for status people seem to be so high in applying for work in our industry, other than if they get a new job, they've been validated, and so their status has been reaffirmed. So they might just be more likely to leave. I don't know. But the low need for status people, we definitely saw that moderating effect there. Where people are likely, more likely to be attracted to organizations that signal status. And so I think that, is satisfying a certain psychological need, and then people want to be part of that, right? It's better to work for a high status company than a low status company, even if you don't necessarily need a lot of status in your personal life. You're going to get that through that association with the company where you don't necessarily need it as an individual, but everybody likes status because we recognize it's being a good thing and doing certain things for us in our lives. And it's part of the social hierarchy. So those low need for status people are attracted to those organizations that signal status because that's how they're getting it, even though they're not trying to get it in their personal lives. So it's really like through that that group affiliation, which is, I think, a really interesting psychological effect that hopefully I'll be able to explore with more studies in the future. But it continues that methodological pattern for me as well. Survey data, experimental data, SEM studies, and if I can, starting with qualitative data. And then finally, what I've really gotten into recently are studies about the industrial context. So there's an economist who works at Florida State in the College of Hospitality, Tarek Dogru. I think he spoke with this group last year. So he's really been guiding me on that, on how hotel investment affects employment in our industry. So we did that study. We found that it's not the extreme end on the type of hotels that get invested in and built in a community that generates the most employment. It's not luxury hotels. It's not economy hotels. It's upper upscale hotels. So it's people who travel that have disposable income that can stay at a nice place, but that place doesn't have the best restaurant, the best spa, the best of everything. So they need to go out in the community and spend money. So we see a certain type of hotel development creates more jobs and higher pay across the board. And that is that upper upscale type development. So if you were a city planner or a mayor or a council member, you'd want that type of hotel over luxury hotels or mid-scale hotels or something else. We found that job abundance. So there's a lot of jobs available in the economy. So these are some of those like post-COVID studies trying to figure out what's happened to the labor market. And that's partially why I haven't followed up on that other study yet. I've been busy doing this, is looking at job abundance in other economic sectors draw people away from our industry. They tend to be higher paid, and they also tend to also be service-related industries because people in hospitality have really good skills at managing service delivery systems, and therefore they have those transferable skills, the people management skills, the process management skills, and everything that they need. So we see these higher paying industries that have a need for basically the people with the skill set hospitality has. And that's another thing that, goes back to my master's thesis. I was actually able to cite my master's thesis in that work about that transferable skill set. So we also looked at hospitality attraction with job openings in the United States. So how do we get people into hospitality when everybody's hiring, including us? How do we cut through? And we actually saw that in the US, only 2 industries had their wages go up faster than inflation, and that was retail and hospitality.
Wow.
So we were making headlines for increased pay, but when you start at the bottom, we didn't catch up. We just had a lot of increases. And we found that only certain parts of the hospitality industry were attracting people. So those were the more high status things. So accommodation and entertainment. So basically people working in concert venues, sports venues, and people working in hotels. Those types of jobs we saw people coming into the industry with, but food service work, industrial management work, and like recreation and more tourism focused work, we didn't see anybody coming into the industry. We were unable to attract significant people.
So here's my questions. Like when you said the hospitality industry and the salary is going up after COVID-19,
Yeah.
which means job abundance there and the lack of labor people. There is a disparity between the supply and demand, and then which lead the salary goes up. So which is as a good sign for our industry or bad sign for our industry? It's hard to believe it's a good sign.
I think it's both.
Boss?
Yeah, I think it's a sign that business levels are going back up. And so we can afford to pay the higher wages and we need those people.
Okay.
So I think all that's a good sign. The bad sign is there's not enough people to hire and we can't accommodate all that business,
Okay.
especially in the US. I don't know if this was the case worldwide, but in the US, there was a lot of service delivery failures, especially in 2021 and 2022.
Why?
There weren't enough people working.
Okay, see.
So everybody started going back out again, and there weren't enough people working in the industry to accommodate it. And so that created a lot of problems, a lost opportunity to grow businesses, I think, as much as they could have. They weren't, it constrained growth. They couldn't deal with the capacity.
Okay.
So I think it's sort of like a good thing and a bad thing at the same time.
Okay, see.
Yeah. So, so as you can see, we're now citing papers that were published in 2024. So we're at the end of the research part of the presentation and how I have tried to make a contribution to theory in our field and the statements that I've tried to make. So putting it all together, I kind of see this as like why people leave, why people don't apply, what the industrial context is, what people expect out of work in the industry, whether they are thinking of coming into the industry or are already working here. And I kind of call that the anticipatory principle, right? So that's sort of what I feel like my contribution is that those future-oriented effects, what you anticipate, that's important. We can't forget about it from a practice standpoint or from a theoretical development standpoint. So that's sort of like really disappointing to see on a screen that everything that I've worked on for the last 12 years comes down to 3 words. But I think that that's really what my contribution has been, is trying to nudge people to think about things in those terms. So that's kind of how I surmise my work. And if it's also very important to figure out a way to describe your work in 90 seconds or less, right? Because when you are at conferences, when you are meeting people for the first time, you can't really explain yourself. You have to give like an effective soundbite in those networking opportunities. So I can say, I study the career arc, what attracts people into industries and organizations, what drives them out. My main takeaway has been trying to develop the anticipatory principle. Oh, okay. I get everything out. And if people have questions, they can ask me. And if somebody at a conference, especially, is like, oh, hi, Dr. McGinley, and then I turn and shake their hand, and then I'm not talking to the person that I was just talking to. And you get pulled in so many different directions, and so does everybody else, that having that 90-second or less way to describe this is who I am and this is what I do is extremely important. And so that's my 90-second or less sales pitch, essentially, like my self-brand, if you will. And that's an important thing to have, and something that I didn't really fully understand, because we think of academia and being a professor, professors profess, we talk. We give presentations that are 15 minutes long. We write 9,000 word journal articles. We always have enough time to explain ourselves until you go to a conference when it really matters and you maybe don't even have 1 minute. And so being able to kind of like have that 2 or 3 sentence description of who you are and what you do, I think is important. So that's mine. So all that work gets summed up that way, which is, fun.
Professor Sean,
Yes.
I have a question. It was really super interesting for me because you just mentioned about your personal story, which is really interesting and similar with me. I just wonder, it's a kind of a personal question actually. As you mentioned before, you have lots of a lot of the area to your work and the industry, hospital industry in the world actually. But you back to the study, or after you said it's 28. Even me, I'm just come back to the study for like older than you at the time. However, for me still yet, it's pretty hard to do this kind of things for as a research thesis. So how did you do making like this to improve yourself to at your position? So I really wonder, and then I really needed desperate how to do that, because for me as well, I was aviation industry at 10 year like you. So I just come back to do because I really needed for the turnover something to upgrade myself, as you mentioned. So but the research paper, as you got the data, as you doing for the some models and SEM and also and a lot of things to do. So please give me any of recommendation to how to make it like come back to the study here. It's pretty hard actually. So give me some tip. Thank you.
Yeah. Listen to your professors. Um,
Oh,
they
of course, I listen always. I try to do that. So
yeah. But that's what I did. I trusted that they had my best interest at heart, and I believed in them and they believed in me. And so when they said you need to do this, even if I really, really didn't want to do it, like one professor made me do like a annotated bibliography of HR work in the last 10 years. I did not want to do that. That was terrible. That was probably the worst thing that I did as a graduate student. But it was extremely valuable because I went through the literature and looked at all of the HR articles in the last 10 years that had been published and wrote my notes. So I became intimate with the literature and I knew how I felt from my experience. So I had my personal like uh, glasses on to interpret what I was reading, but I, saw it through the eyes of theory rather than personal experience. And so my experiences were able to determine my perceptions of what I was reading. And then when it came down to statistics, the last time I had taken a math class was in high school. So that was 10 years before I went and sat in my first statistics class. And I just listened to the professors and did everything that I needed to do. I did all of the assignments, I did all the reading. And I also understood that I didn't need to learn every single method, and I didn't need to be an expert on every single method. That I picked a few methods to get really good at and then help manage my relationships so that if I wasn't the best qualified person to do a specific statistical test or analysis, that I would find a co-author who was. And just like we can't be an expert in all the different theories, we can't be an expert in all of the different methods. So I tried to become a specialist in certain things. And so I got really good at process modeling, and I got really good at qualitative data, and I got really good in my like neo-career theory background and understanding of the world. And so those three things are like the main tools that I have in my toolbox. And I know different theories and I do know different methods, but I'm not as proficient on them as those. So I think like trying to become really good at a couple of valuable things than learning how to do everything and know every theoretical stream and every statistical method, made sense for me and who I am. I don't know if that helps answer your question or not.
no, it was perfect. Thank you. I know that it's pretty hard to do that, but I'm trying always. Thank you. Thank you for your
Yeah.
answer.
It's a series of choices that you make. And I think when you have that professional background and you have those questions, it makes it a little bit easier to make the choices that are best for you. And then always talk to your professors about the classes you're going to be taking, what you're learning, what you're studying, what you're reading, because if you're going down a path that isn't going to serve you as best as it can, trust them when they say that and take corrective action. Yeah. Never be the smartest person in the room.
Of course, thank you.
Yeah. If you're ever the smartest person in a room, get out and go somewhere else, because you're in the wrong room. Any other questions about this? About my work?
Actually, I think I have one more question.
Yeah.
So it's just related to cultural differences because, as far as I understood, your research was mainly focused on US market. But do you think, like, from global hotel chains perspective, do you think they can apply your models of like labor motivations to their businesses? Or you
I
think like due to cultural differences, the results are gonna be different?
do. I think culture plays a big role in a lot of things that people do, and people think, feel, and act, and culture will help to inform how they think, feel, and act, and interpret the information in the world around them. So I think it would almost have to change through different cultural orientations. I don't I don't do cross-cultural studies. Some of my studies have had data collected outside the US. None of the studies that were in my presentation did. So my main research contribution definitely has a US background to it, and a heavy US slant, absolutely. But actually a study that I'm working on right now, and we are specifically not looking at culture for this one. And this also might be something to think about when you ask questions like that. Is it the culture that is actually driving people's decisions when it's talking about economic things and career management, or is it the labor market itself? And what I just analyzed the data 3 weeks ago. I am behind on getting to my co-authors. So thank you for this question. It reminds me I need to move forward. Without getting into it too much, we collected data in the US, in China, and in Ghana. And so we got a high income, a medium income, and a low income country. And we studied, we controlled for culture. So statistically speaking, at least, culture shouldn't be playing a role, to isolate the labor market effects, to determine why people in those three different labor markets are more or less likely to want to engage in turnover. So we got significant results and have a three-way interaction between the three countries. So if it's not culture, then it must have something to do with the structure of those labor markets and the opportunities that people have. And so I think there's been a lot of work done on culture and not enough work done on the structure of societies and how societies differ and how those hard labor market effects might also influence people. So in terms of cross-cultural studies, personally, I'm not that interested because there's so many studies on, like, the difference between the US and China. Like, there's just so many. And I'm like, great, people have done this work. Good for them. Let's look at how the labor markets differ between, high, low, and medium income countries. I think that is a much more interesting question, not because it's more valuable, because less people are asking it. And so that's the direction that I'm going, and hopefully I'll have a paper forthcoming on that topic soon. But like I said, I just analyzed the data a couple weeks ago, so I'm not fully ready to talk about all the details yet because I'm not done interpreting it.
Okay,
But
thank you for answering the question. Looking forward to reading your future paper.
hopefully. But yeah, I think too, yeah, there's a lot of things out there that could be interesting to add on to it. Excuse me.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, so the next topic. Oh yeah, this is my segue into the next topic. So this is me, 9th year at Florida State, 37 articles. Not all of my articles are in that stream of research that I just discussed, because as you meet co-authors, they have their own streams of research. You want to work together, so you work together on different things. 20 of those 37 articles, first or second author, 2 of those are solo author papers. So as an assistant professor, I was very cognizant of authorship. The new APA rules, if you can become et al. Very quickly. So if it's just McGinley and Co., great, both of our names are there. But as soon as we have a lot of different names, even on the first citation, it just becomes McGinley et al. So as assistant professor, I didn't publish as many articles as I could have, because I wanted to make sure I was first author and didn't get et al. And wanted to make more of a name for myself in the industry. So something to also think about when you're a graduate student or a new professor, just as part of your own personal branding. That's how I did it specifically.
Actually, index 21st, 21 is a great performance.
Thank you. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So the next part of the presentation, and this is the presentation I wish I had listened to when I was a student, was not how to get a paper published, but how do you create a stream of research that builds on itself? And then what do you do once you have a stream of research completed? So I am going to say some things now that your professors might not like me saying to you. So I apologize to all of your professors in advance. So to figure out how you're going to do a stream of research, why are you interested in that subject? Are you able to enjoy the learning process through research? Because if the answer is no to those first 2 questions, research is really hard and you'll get exhausted and you will hate your papers. And that's just not a way to live. That's not a good job to do, right? And so will you get excited to work on that subject outside of the research context? Do you care enough to do more than write a paper about it? And if you do, you know you're kind of hitting on something that you're intrinsically motivated by, just like I was with that first research question that I had. So
nice
figuring
picture.
out. Oh, what's that?
Nice picture, photo.
Oh yeah, this is the Kyung-hee section. So you want to figure out those answers, right? When we communicate to people, we want them to take action, we explain the why we're doing something before we do the how or the what, right? If I just say, do these things, people are going to say, well, why? Or question it or push back, right? We all do that. But if I understand why I'm doing something, I can figure out how to do it, and then I can figure out the actual steps of what to actually do. So a lot of times, your professors will be able to teach you the what, right? What data analysis looks like, what articles to read, what theory looks like, all of these different things. They might even tell you how to build theory or how to go about conceptualizing a paper. But they won't really be able to tell you why to do it. You have to come up with that why for yourself, right? Why are you asking those questions? Why are you collecting that kind of data? Why are you interpreting that data a certain way? Why are you doing these things? And if you know your why are you a professor? Why are you studying hospitality, right? All of these things can make the how and the what you do a lot more clear and can explain, why you are doing research in a particular topic. So once you get those questions answered, we get to work, right? We start with building theory or we start with questioning theory. And so I started with qualitative data because I really wanted to talk to people. I came from an industry background where I talked to people all day. I wanted to do qualitative research. And so that's what I did. right? Once you know your questions, then start questioning theory or start building theory. Because if all you do is add on to theory or fill gaps, we got enough people doing that already, right? If you really want to create a stream of research that is something new, that is fruitful, that you can work on for years, you've got to be questioning the way things are done or creating new understandings of the world, right? So don't accept the world as it is. The point of what we're doing is to improve the world, right? We're supposed to be making the world a better place. So building critical mass, right? Future studies. How was the last paper you did able to be cited to support what you're doing on this paper? And how is this paper setting the stage for the next study that you're writing, right? So they're all interconnected in the same topic. This is a great way to cheat and increase your citations because you keep citing yourself. But also it's a way for you to get known about a particular topic because you keep researching that topic and saying it in different ways and supporting that with evidence and data, right? So even if you don't write really thoughtful future study sections, you should write them anyway, because that's the roadmap to what you're going to do next and how you're going to communicate to potential co-authors what you want to do. So that also allows you to conceptualize multiple papers at a time, which might also save you money and time because you can collect data to write multiple papers at the same time. So that one survey or that one experiment might collect data for a couple of different studies. And if you know how to do that ethically, then it saves you time and money, which is a great thing to do, right? So thinking about how everything is interconnected and how each paper builds on the last is really important. And once you're able to do that, assembling your resources, right? Identify who your potential collaborators will be because they have a theoretical expertise or because they have a methodological expertise. And you might have that same expertise, but it might be burden sharing. It might just be the ability to kick ideas off of somebody else who's also thinking at things at a high level. But what I have personally found is the co-authors that I write the most with are the people that don't share my background. So there's a lady, from China who studies marketing, who went to Purdue, shares nothing in common with me from a personal background or a professional background. And we've published like 8 papers together because we met at a conference once. And she comes at things with a different methodological and theoretical base than I do. So that makes her a really interesting person for me to work with because she doesn't approach these same questions the same way I do. Tarek is an economist from Turkey who went to South Carolina. No personal or professional commonality, but we've also started to write a series of papers together because not sharing my background adds more to me than I could add by getting somebody who is a lot more similar to me, right? Somebody with an HR OB background isn't going to challenge me the same way, isn't going to have me think about things differently the way that Wei and Tarek do. And so if people are too similar to you, you don't learn as much from them. So you want to try to get people that are as different from you as possible. And it might not make as much sense early on. And it might be more frustrating working with them on the first 2 papers. But once you start creating your own little language, your own little synergy, and understand and trust each other, those are the people that will push you the hardest. And those are the people that will ultimately make you the best version of yourself that you can be. So those people are your resources. And those people will introduce you to people you wouldn't have met normally. So then you start collaborating with a lot more people from a lot more institutions, and it just makes your professional background much more vibrant and large than if you stick with like a team of people and you all do the same thing. It makes your world very small. And so,
Okay,
yeah.
Professor, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
How about marriage?
Same. My wife is very different from me.
Okay. This is a serious question. here we have a the graduate student here.
Mhm.
They point they have their own the advisor.
Mhm.
In the middle of their semester or in the middle of their the course, anyway, they just happen to choose their academic advisor. Actually, it's hard for them to changing or finding alternative advisor in the same school because you know the human. In that case, what is your recommendation for students to finding the best advisor or suitable advisor for their resource, whatever stuff?
I
Because
think
before that we finding our co-authors or before we finding our collaborators, anyway, we have to receive the very good trained under the supervision of my instructor, my advisor or professors. So what's your recommendation?
I think somebody that you get along with interpersonally is really important. Somebody that you trust, and somebody who has the time to allow you to learn, grow, and develop, right? Somebody who will work as that mentorship role. And as you are a student and are learning the literature, I think it's good to have somebody that does kind of share your background from an academic standpoint, because you're learning the theories, right? You don't know them yet. So somebody, I think, almost like the difference of finding a good team of co-authors who study all these different theories. An advisor should know those theories, right? Should know when you're getting off track, know when you're missing something. And then from developing your co-author network, at least where I went to school, you know, we all were in the same college, but we all also studied different things. So your students can be like some of those first co-authors that you meet that study a different background than you do, or a different academic subject than you do. But I think it's important to have a good relationship with your advisor and somebody that will make sure you're not missing key information, would be my advice.
Okay.
So lastly, as you were doing this, work to identify the themes in your work, right? The connective tissue between all of your papers, you need to spell out. You need to speak to a reader about that. You need to talk to your advisor about that. You need to talk to your promotion and tenure committee about that. You need to be able to communicate that to everybody else, because you need to weave all of those studies together and explain it to people. So that's where being able to cite yourself, being able to build on that is all very important, because themes will emerge in your own work. I didn't set out to study the anticipatory principle or these future-oriented effects. It just turned out that's what I kept studying. That's what I kept asking questions about. And that's what I kept getting significant results about. So after a while, I noticed that theme emerge. And so my background as a qualitative researcher, I saw that, I identified it, and I ran with it. And now that's part of my professional identity in my work, right? So if you start conceptualizing groups of papers together, you'll start knowing what's in common with them, and that'll allow you to talk about them, not just in the papers themselves, but also to people at conferences and everything else. So this is the part where we get maybe a little controversial. So don't tell your professors about this. What do we do with our work, right? The point of all of this is not to get published. Publishing is something that ensues, not a goal in itself, right? The point is to make a positive difference in the world. And you're only going to be able to do that if you pick something about which you care. You can't make a positive difference in the world if you don't care about it. And publishing is a wonderful thing to do, but one individual paper It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for your career. It doesn't matter for the literature. It doesn't matter really for anything. So publishing isn't the point. Making a positive difference in the world is. And publishing can be a vehicle to help you do that. But the goal is not just to get acceptance. So what comes next, right? This is defining success through failure. And I'm probably a person that's failed more than most people, and I'm very proud of that fact. So talk about some of my failures, right? In 2021, we had over 10,000 articles published in hospitality, tourism, and events in 272 different journals. 15,000 authors were involved in all of that work. So what possible contribution is of all this work when in my lifetime, I'm probably not going to read 10,000 articles. There's no way I can keep up with the literature. There's no way anyone else can keep up with the literature. There's too many papers being published, which is really, really incredible to think about. So there's never been a better time to publish, and there's never been a worse time to publish. So why are we publishing this much, right? Who's benefiting from this publication avalanche, right? Academics are beginning to become driven, in my opinion, and you can disagree with this, about that corporate model of quantitative metrics, right? Our numbers are what defines our success or not, rather than the quality of our work, right? Journal impact factor for me is academic status ratio. It's not really the impact that the journal is having, because is anybody doing anything with any of that work in the real world, or is it just getting published, right? So who benefits from this model? The journals. And not even the journals, the publishers of the journals. More papers published in more journals and more outlets that my professors need to cite and publish in. So therefore, my department or my university or my college needs to have a subscription to more and more journals. The publishers make more and more money. The publishers
exactly
benefit. We don't benefit. Society doesn't benefit. Publishers benefit, right? But we need to get tenure, and we need to get jobs, right? But it has really led to this really interesting quote from Jafar Jafari about, prioritizing quantity over quality, right? Making authors responsive to that, publish or perish principle, making demands of increasing more journals, more issues from more journals, more articles, more desk rejects, more opportunities for authors to get published. And he goes on to say, we basically created our own closed universe where our accomplishments are inflated because we keep citing each other, because there's so many more articles to cite, that all these impact factors and I-10 and H10 indexes are going crazy, where some of the best, most influential business professors in the world have a lower, H index than I do, right? So what does that really, really matter, right? So it really scathing kind of conclusion from Jafari. And I think in this, it is super disappointing and frustrating and like, why are we doing this? But also super exciting and interesting time to be getting into this world, because we are starting to ask questions that will lead to a very, very, in my opinion, bright future. And so what I kind of come away with this is that our publications no longer matter. We've devalued individual publications, right? Our research is not leading to changes in the field, practice, policy, general understanding. We've created so many numbers, we've devalued our own work, right? So what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And where do we go from here, right? And we have to figure out to who our work matters. This goes back to why we're doing what we're doing. Are you trying to get published or trying to build something of value, right? And if you're trying to build something of value, you understand that you need to get published. You need to make a name for yourself. You need to be a subject matter expert. You need to be planning, and you need to be creating a stream of research. because no individual paper you publish counts for anything. But your stream of research is extremely valuable because that's your statement, that's your body of work, that speaks to your expertise. That's who you are, right? And if you can't publish multiple papers in that topic because you're not interested or you don't care, it's going to make it very difficult to do something of value to the world. And we're starting to really look at the impact our professors are having and the positive impact they're having in the world right now. So it's really, really exciting because we're getting to do really cool things. And so I'm about to go through all of the ways that I have failed and all of the ways that I think that failure has really led to a great personal journey for me, and one that's benefited my university, and one that I think all of us can really talk about, because failure comes in two forms. I think true failure, where you kind of give up, where you fall short by not challenging yourself and just following along, and for whatever reason, you're not up to the cut, right? And then the other kind of failure is aspiring to be something great, to do something better than what we are doing now, and to really go out and try to change things. And that type of failure is the kind of failure that I want and I respect and I honor. And that's the kind of way that I'm failing right now, and the kind of way that I'm learning and will have more and more success. But the only way that I've been put in a position to be able to do these things is because I published, right? Because I created a stream of research. And I didn't just publish, I published all in a particular topic that built on itself and tells a story about who I am and what value I can add to you, your life, your organization, so on and so forth, right? So that's where publications matter. That's why we're doing all this. So the first thing I was able to do was consult, right? Work directly with industry, make a little bit of money. It's great. It's not. I absolutely hated it. It was the worst thing I ever did. My least favorite summer as a professor was the summer when I had a consulting gig. It was awful. You might love it. But you get to work directly with industry on projects. You use your expertise to solve a real problem that somebody's having in the world. You develop relationships that can benefit your program, donors, guest speakers, opportunities for your undergraduates to get jobs and internships, and see how your work plays out in a real industrial context. So I was doing a satisfaction survey looking at why people were leaving a particular organization, which makes a lot of sense because that's what my research is on, right? And so I published enough about that. Somebody saw that, needed that work to be done, and I was able to get a consulting check and do it. And I will never do it again because I absolutely hated it. This is not my world, right? And for some professors, this is the goal, to be a consultant. How do you become a consultant? You be a subject matter expert in something that companies need and will add value to organizations. How do you become a subject matter expert? Publish a string of papers on those topics. The next thing you can do is do action research, right? Take your research to the community, get opportunities to collaborate with nonprofits, maybe smaller companies in your area that couldn't afford consultants on their own and can't pay you. You can get your students involved in the community, and work with people and businesses to help the environment, local community, and other things, right? So my students helped remove single-use plastic toothbrushes from a hotel here in Tallahassee and replace them with bamboo toothbrushes. So that was good for the environment locally. And then we also worked on a food waste reduction program from a local catering company, because these were two projects that my students were really interested in. So I lent my statistical analysis and expertise and my knowledge of managing and understanding profit margins and what a business needs with their passion for these subjects. And we came together and had successful projects with these two local companies. Great work, very rewarding, very fulfilling. Great to see your students be able to do these types of things, but also really exhausting and time consuming. So some people, especially in other fields that are not hospitality, action research is the most important thing that they do. For me, working with undergrads in this capacity was exhausting. And I quickly realized I really can't do this on a regular, ongoing basis. So I got out of the action research world. The other thing that you can do is figure out how your work contributes to solving big issues, right? The world is not a perfect place. We got issues, right? So how can your work help with climate change, conflict? There's a giant war going on in Ukraine right now, right? Global poverty and hunger, disparities in health outcomes, cultural preservation efforts, sustainable global economic development, unequal outcomes for education, especially female education and literacy around the world, workforce development projects, all sorts of things that you might be able to relate to your research. And that might help you apply your research and apply your research to things that you also care about, right? Assuming you care about more than just the topic of your research.
How about the smart tourism?
What's that?
Smart tourism, where is it?
Oh, I could only fit so much on the slide. Yeah. I mean, there's tons of issues globally, locally, right? Even at various countries struggle with different things, right? So how is your work applied to some of these big issues that are out there that people need help solving? So my partners, and I'm a hospitality professor, include our coastal and marine lab that studies oysters, sharks, and scallops. And they do environmental restoration projects. But also being in Florida, we get a lot of people vacationing and going to the water. And when people go and boat and fish and do all of those different things, they can actually destroy the areas that the Coastal and Marine Lab has just worked on and rehabilitated. So working with them to figure out how tourism can overlay with that environmental project and develop the workforce in those areas so that people understand the importance of preserving the environment and how in the tourism economy in Florida, the environment is the economy, right? That's why people come to Florida. People go to Seoul for culture. People come to Florida for nature, right? So what is it in your particular area with your particular university? We're also working with the Native American Indigenous Study Center to do workforce development programs for Native American tribes because of unequal education outcomes and poverty level in that community here in the United States. So how can we help these people have better lives through the hospitality and tourism industry, start businesses, and get higher paying skilled jobs in the hospitality and tourism industry? We have a Ukraine task force. So I have a meeting on Thursday about workforce development projects for Ukrainian war veterans. So when they transition from their Soviet economy to a more modern services-based economy, people have those hospitality skill set and education for once peace is achieved. And so all of these different centers and institutes and committees exist in different forms across the universities around the world. One of our partner institutions is in Mexico because they have a research center in Mexico that supports the work that we're doing here in Florida. So that's something that we can work on together, right? International collaboration. And that's really about the effect recreation has on migratory birds between the US, Canada, and Mexico. So universities down there have a vested interest in preserving the environment and making money by people coming to see these birds, right? So what resources are you eligible to receive? What partners do you have? And how does your work apply to these big problems? Well, why are people going to give you money to work on these problems? Because you published a stream of research saying you're a subject matter expert. You're one of the few people in the world that can objectively and authoritatively answer certain questions. And not only are you one of the few, you are truly one of the few people in the world that have the capabilities and skills to work on some of these issues. I mean, it's really empowering when you have a PhD, how many doors can be open to you, the power of that, right? Academia gives you the authority of neutrality and expertise. And so you can leverage that. You become a powerful force in the world. You might not feel like it as a first-year assistant professor, but when you start accumulating papers in the same topic and become a subject matter expert, you might be one of a dozen or 24 people on Earth that is actually qualified to work on one of these issues. And so that is extremely empowering. And our field is beginning to recognize the importance of true impact, not just journal impact factors, which is why it has never been a better time or a worse time to publish in the history of our field. It's like the best and worst time to be doing this. I'm an optimist, so I look at it as the power and the beauty of our ability to go out and be a global force for good. Because we are such a large industry. We're in every economy, we're in every country. We matter, and what we do matters. And so I kind of feel like we are a fire, and you can cook your dinner with us, or it can burn your house down. And it's up to us to control it and make it a benefit for everybody that we share this earth with. So join hospitality, be a global force for good.
Okay, thank you. Wow.
Yeah.
You're inspiring me.
I hope so. I hope I didn't talk for too long.
Okay, very good. Well, I remember the two keywords from your mouth. One is the people come to Seoul because of nature, culture, it's K-pop culture and the food culture sort of things.
Mhm.
And then people hope to visit Florida because of nature. And then, like you, professor in the Florida state, you must do the two keywords at the same time: sustainable growth with climate change and the natural science together. So,
Yeah.
which is critical keywords. Good.
Yeah, it's a big issue for Florida. We're so low-lying. Climate change is a big threat, and we're already so hot. Climate change is another big threat.
As you may know or not know, I'm starting a journal business, Journal of Smart Tourism. I'm going to transfer Journal of Smart Tourism to the SEIJI since 2025. So once again, I'm trying to make publishers money. So they make money because of my contribution.
Yeah. So you're helping somebody there.
You know, but I, as a representative of a Korean academia, I'm trying to catch up the mainstream of America. So I hate, the Western, the America and the Europe. They control everything's the knowledge, information, and through the journal business and through the publishers business. So we are behind there, like especially China, Japan, Korea. We are trying to catch up the Western society and the academia and the science. So in order to catch up the science in there, absolutely, journal business is so vital. So that's why I'm launching the Journal of Smart Tourism, and since 2021 I've been operate the journal by myself, and then finally Seiji they saw my performance of JST, and then they decided to invest their money to the Journal of Smart Tourism, and together with me. So
That's exciting.
Professor Sean McGinley, it's time to help me. Please submitting your papers. One.
I'll have more to come out.
Okay. Okay, students, we have 10 minutes left. If you have any question for him, you can do it.
Yes.
Good.
So, hello, Dr. Sean. Thank you for this great talk. So, you mentioned that if people are too similar to us, they add little and we don't learn anything. So, I was wondering how can the hospitality industry promote diversity and inclusion in the workforce?
In the workforce.
Yeah.
Well, from a US perspective, and you know, that's where I am, the industry is more diverse than the country. So we have that going for us. But as you look at the ranks, the top of the organization, it becomes increasingly male and increasingly white. And that's where I think the problem is we aren't doing enough to make sure people get promoted that come from different backgrounds. So if you don't look like me, unfortunately, you have a harder chance to get to the top of an organization. And I think that's a problem, right? We can't have one group of people in charge of everything because then they start making those same decisions, the same mistakes, the pattern repeats itself. So it's really not about making the industry more diverse. We're already an incredibly diverse industry. I think it's about creating more fair and equitable systems to get more women and people who are not white and people who are not Western white to ascend to the tops of organizations. And how we do that, that's a big question. And if I had the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be a professor anymore. But I think that's really where the issue is getting people to move up and ascend in promotions, not
The higher
necessarily
rankings.
just getting them into the industry.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Oh, I have a question to Professor. Thank you for your presentation first, and while I listening to your explanation, I was thinking about employee turnover in the hospitality industry. So this is just my small curiosity of mine. So I know that tipping culture is very important in the US hospitality industry, but whereas there is no tipping culture in Korea actually. So is there any could the presence or absence of tipping culture also affect employee turnover rates?
Yes. I don't know if there is a direct tie to tipping and turnover, but I do know that as people in the US are like in tipped employee positions, they tend to get exploited more and harassed more, not only from managers, but also from guests. So it creates vulnerabilities in the workforce, and that can drive people out of the industry. Um, Obviously, that's going to be a generalization, and different organizations that really take great care of their employees. Like if you look at like Danny Meyer restaurants in New York, I wouldn't expect that to be a problem because they're very well run professional organizations that want people to be working there, even in tipped positions for long periods of time because they're professional jobs. But other, you know, let's say high volume, low margin businesses that, you know, rely on tips, we have seen workers be exploited, and that's a problem. But I think too, we also see workers being exploited in different positions that aren't guest facing and aren't tipped positions like housekeeping. So really it's a search for vulnerable workers and how to exploit them for the benefit of the company. And that becomes a problem. And tipping is one way in which we do that in the US.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Very good question. Anyone? Okay. Sean, as you since this is a global, the graduate students from Kyunghee University, not only the hospitality and hotel tourism management, but also the general subject here as well. So, what do you think about between? Can you compare your school and our school, the student desire and aspiration sort of things, or capability? What do you think?
Well, your school just jumped us in the rankings, so I think you're doing a better job than we are. Congratulations there. But you know, we see Kyunghee as our sister university across the world, because there's a lot of similarities in the curriculum and the program and the outcomes for the students. So we have a lot of love and respect for what you're doing, and are, you know, excited to partner, whether it's our exchange with undergrads, or me coming to speak in a forum like this. So, you know, we just think what you're doing is really great, and we're happy to be a partner and have a university in Korea that is willing to work with us on such a deep level, with professors and students alike.
Okay, very good. Actually, the Kyunghee is one of the leading schools in South Korea. Means we are national level, you are state level. So that's why we are not. Okay. I'm very thankful to Professor Sean McGinley, and today is his seminar is so impactful to our student as well as myself. I learning from his presentation, like what I said, is a very good, you know, phrase, because of culture in Seoul, because of nature in Florida State, and also like he mentioned that it's so important, if you want to work a certain specific domain, you have to stay over about 10 years or whatever, and then become your expertise of a certain domain. And you will be evaluated as a neutrality sort of things. It's a so important keywords for myself. Wow, as I'm learning from you. That's why we need a seminar from outsider, and there's those kind of collaborator and professor inspire us to learning more. Thank you very much today. I'm looking forward to see you, Sean McGinley, in the conference sooner or later, and keep working on with us.
Yep, and thank you for having me again. I really appreciate this opportunity. And if anybody has any questions that they didn't have time or didn't want to ask over Zoom, send me an email and I can answer it there, or we can set up a time to talk one-on-one.
Okay. Okay, here in Korea, enjoy your lunch. 吃饭. 우吃饭嘛. It's a Chinese language. Okay, Sean, good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, see you next week. 추석? We don't have a class next week. Enjoy your 추석, right? And after 추석, the day of next week. Okay, enjoy your holiday, and look forward to see you next week, 2 weeks away from now. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy your talk too.
吃饭，吃饭。